You know, as an Overwatch channel, I never expect to say some of the things I have to say, and Dogs Noodles definitely is going to come into that category. Hey guys, how's it going? It's Danconia here, and welcome back to the Overwatch Contenders Roundup 2020. This is part 2 of our double bill of the results this week from Overwatch Contenders, and now we are going to go through the trials results for week 2 of South America, Europe, and North America. And, once again, there have been some really interesting results. So let's take a look at South America first then. In this region we have Capybara Esports, Petitos, Upgaming, Glacial, Betrayed, Las Salamandras, Black Ronin, Awakening, Pacific Ocelots, VPN, Dogs Noodles, Mutus Muta Rapidas in the Overwatch charts for week 2. Let's go on to the bracket where we see in round 1 or round of 12, whatever you want to call it, Black Ronin taking on VPN. This would be a 3-0 win for VPN with them moving on. Remember, whoever does really poorly in trials for week 2 will drop down to Open Division playoffs because there is an Open Division Season 2 that will take place between weeks 2 and 3 of Contenders. So, anyone who doesn't do well, like Black Ronin haven't, will be dropping down to Open Division. Moving on, an Awakening will be taking on Dogs Noodles, and this would be a 3-2 win for Dogs and Noodles. I cannot believe I'm saying that. Then we have Mutus Muta Rapidas taking on Las Salamandras. This would be a 3-1 win for the Rapidas, and they will be moving on to the quarterfinals. And then Betrayed will be taking on Pacific Ocelots, and this would be a 3-2 win for the Pacific Ocelots, and they will be moving on to the quarterfinals. Everyone who loses in that first round will be going down to Open Division. So they have got some fights coming up. But moving on to the quarterfinals, and we see Petitos taking on VPN. This would be a 3-0 win for Petitos, with them moving on to the semi-finals. Upgaming will be taking on Dogs Noodles. This would be a 3-1 win for Dogs Noodles, and they would move on to the semi-finals. Then Capybara Esports will be taking on Mutus Muta Rapidas. This would be a 3-0 win for Capybara Esports. And then Glacial will be taking on Pacific Ocelots, and this would be a 3-0 win for Pacific Ocelots, and they would move on to the semi-finals. Then, in the semi-finals, we see Petitos taking on Dogs Noodles. This would be a 3-0 win for Petitos, and they will be moving on. And Capybara Esports would be taking on Pacific Ocelots, and this would be a 3-1 win for the Pacific Ocelots, with them moving on to the final. In the final, of course, we saw Petitos taking on Pacific Ocelots, and this would be a 3-1 win for Petitos, and they would take home the crown of champions of Contenders Trials Week 2 in South America. So, moving on then, and we see that going through to Week 2 of the main Contenders Tournament in South America will be Petitos, Pacific Ocelots, Capybara Esports, Dogs Noodles as the top 4, and then VPN, Upgaming, Mutus Muta Rapidas, and Glacial. So, the 4 teams knocked out and going down to Open Division Season 2 playoffs will be Black Ronin, Awakening, Las Salamandras, and Betrayed. They will have to complete through those Open Division Season 2 playoffs with the teams that come up from Open Division for Season 2 for a place in Trials in Week 3. Moving on to Europe then, where we will see Nariki Esports, Young and Beautiful, HSL Esports, Samsung Morning Stars, Vox Nihili, Angry Titans, Clockwork Vendetta, Notting Contenders, Ex Oblivione, Barcelona Manticores, Olympians, and Dreadlords. So, there's an interesting result here, which we will go through in a minute, but remember that HSL Esports, the current holders of the Contenders title in Europe, had to drop down 2 trials this week after not doing too well in the main Contenders tournament last week. So, getting on to the bracket then, and in the round of 12, remember, everyone who loses here will be going to Open Division. And I say that because, first of all, we have Angry Titans taking on Ex Oblivione, and this was a 3-0 win for Ex Oblivione. So, former Overwatch Contenders winners, Angry Titans, will be in Open Division in Season 2. That's surprising. I mean, Titans are going through a phase, a transition phase, you could call it. They haven't got the team that they used to have. Notably the tank line, the Swedish tank line of Elivo and Lolshish that they used to have is now at the Washington Justice, you might remember. But it's still a surprise to see a team of this stature be in Open Division. So, yeah, there's work to do over there. But moving on, Notting Contenders will be taking on Barcelona Manticores. This will be a 3-0 win for Notting Contenders, with the Manticores going down to Open Division. Then we had Vox Nihili taking on Dreadlords. This would be a 3-1 win for Dreadlords, with Vox Nihili going down to Open Division Season 2 playoffs, and Clockwork Vendetta would take on Olympians, and this would be a 3-0 win for Clockwork Vendetta, and Olympians will be going down to Open Division Season 2 playoffs. Moving on to the quarterfinals, and we see HSL Esports take on the Next Oblivione. This would be a 3-0 win for HSL, with them moving on to the semi-final. Young and Beautiful will take on Nottingham Contenders. This would be a 3-0 win for Young and Beautiful, with them moving on to the semi-finals. Niriki Esports will take on Dreadlords. Again, a 3-0 win for Niriki Esports, with them moving on to the semi-finals. And Clockwork Vendetta would take on Samsung Morning Stars. And Clockwork Vendetta would get a pretty handy 3-1 victory over Samsung Morning Stars to see themselves through to the semi-finals. Samsung Morning Stars, bit of a fall from grace in some respects, because they were one of the seeded teams in the previous week from that seeding tournament, but they've kind of fallen a bit flat all of a sudden. So, in the semi-finals, HSL Esports will take on Young and Beautiful. This will be a 3-1 win for Young and Beautiful, with HSL Esports, current Contenders holders, remember, not able to get the crown of Contenders Trials winners for Week 2, so yeah, a bit of a surprise there, HSL not living up to what they were. Niriki Esports would take on Clockwork Vendetta, and this would be a 3-1 win for Niriki Esports, with them moving on to the final, taking on Young and Beautiful, and Young and Beautiful would see a 3-0 win over Niriki Esports and claim the crown of Contenders Trials Season 1, Week 2 champions. So, Young and Beautiful will move on as that #1 seed into Contenders for Week 2, followed by Niriki Esports, HSL Esports, and Clockwork Vendetta, as you may have expected. Ex Oblivione, Nottingham Contenders, Dreadlords, and Samsung Morning Stars will also join them in Contenders Week 2, but dropping down to Open Division, as I did say earlier, Olympians, Vox Nihili, Barcelona Manticores, and Angry Titans, which is... it's a surprise, but yeah, who knows who we might be seeing. I mean, we've seen Runaway in Contenders Trials now. I mean, if they don't do very well in Contenders Trials, they'll go down to Open Division, imagine that. We are seeing this new format for Contenders is really shaking things up. But let's move on to North America then. And in North America we saw some interesting stuff because, of course, Atlanta Academy got their backsides whacked by Maryville Saints last week, so they're in Trials as well. But in Trials we did see Revival, Atlanta Academy, Sky Foxes, Karasuno, Triumph, Montreal Rebellion, Third Impact, Noble, Ascent, Uprising Academy, Phase 2, and Simplicity. So, moving on then, and in the round of 12, we saw Montreal Rebellion taking on Ascent. This will be a 3-1 win for Montreal Rebellion. Ascent will be dropping down to Open Division. Triumph would take on Simplicity. This would be a 3-1 win for Triumph, with them moving on. Simplicity would be dropping down to Open Division, as they started off in Open Division playoffs, actually, due to the massive seeding tournament that was in NA at the start of the year. Third Impact would take on Phase 2. This would be a 3-0 win for Third Impact, with them moving on. Phase 2 would be going to Open Division. And then Noble would take on Uprising Academy, and Noble would get a 3-0 win, with them moving on to the quarterfinals. And Uprising Academy, they have just escaped going down to Open Division. Not quite sure how that's worked, but according to what I know, they are going to be in Trials for Week 3. So Uprising Academy have got away with one there. Definitely. But in the quarterfinals, we saw Sky Foxes taking on Montreal Rebellion. This would be a 3-1 win for Montreal Rebellion. Revival would take on Triumph. Again, how many times have we seen Revival take on Triumph? This time, it would be Triumph coming out on top with a 3-1 win over Revival. Karasuno would take on Third Impact with a 3-0 win for Third Impact. They would move on to the semi-finals. And Atlanta Academy would take on Noble, and things really aren't getting much better for Atlanta Academy right now, are they? 3-1 win for Noble, and Noble would be moving on to the semi-finals. In the semi-finals, Montreal Rebellion taking on Triumph. This was a really close match between the Toronto Academy side and Triumph, but the Montreal Rebellion will get a 3-2 win over Triumph and move on to the final. Third Impact would take on Noble, and Noble will get a 3-1 win in that other semi-final to move on to the final. And Noble have actually gone all the way from round of 12 all the way to the final, which is something actually, because you don't see that all that often. But Noble taking on Montreal Rebellion in the final. Noble would complete the sweep of Trials this week. They would get a 3-2 win over Montreal Rebellion and secure that #1 seed from Trials Week 2 in North America. That is very, very good from Noble, actually. Not a lot of people perhaps would have expected them to do so well, and they've beaten some really good teams along the way. Montreal Rebellion, Third Impact, Atlanta Academy. So really good stuff coming out from Noble there. But obviously, let's clear this up. Going through Noble, Montreal Rebellion, Third Impact, Triumph, Sky Foxes, Revival, Karasuno, and Atlanta Academy. Only just Atlanta, only just. You got through via virtue of coming down from Contenders last week. That's basically it. So, staying in Trials for Week 3 will be Uprising Academy, and the 3 teams going down to Open Division Season 2 playoffs will be Ascent, Simplicity, and Phase 2. So, that is your roundup for this week. Next week we will see the main Week 2 tournaments for EU, NA and South America. Also we will see more matches from Korea and China as well as they go through their trials for Week 2. And eventually, I think the week after, we will see Week 2 of their competition as well. And we will see next week how Runaway fare in Contenders Trials. That should be very interesting. And O2 Blast, let's not forget that. But for now, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I will see you in the next video. See you then.